All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Fall 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners. During this webcast, we welcome Jaguar Health, ticker symbol of JAGX on the NASDAQ, and their CEO, Lisa Conte. I've asked Lisa to go through the slide presentation first, and if there is some time available at the end, we'll look to engage in a short fireside chat-like session here. So, Lisa, the floor is all yours. Go ahead.
Thank you, Robert. Thanks for the introduction. And I do want to say I'm so grateful to Lytham Partners for having these conferences focusing on small cap companies, which are really in a difficult time right now with the financial markets. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to highlight our focus on rare diseases and orphan drugs because there are some really important and meaningful clinical milestones in the next 6 months and several important milestones in the next 6 to 12 months. And I think that's really important in these difficult financial times. We feel that this can be transformative in terms of the value recognition of the company. I'll also talk about and highlight some of our mental health initiatives where we do feel that we're going to have some important business developments in the next 6 months, which also can bring in non-dilutive dollars, and we also feel can be transformative for the value of Jaguar Health. So I am going to dispense with our forward-looking statements. Hopefully everybody gets a chance to look at those and move right on. We are known as a plant-based pharmaceutical company doing all our drug discovery from plants that are used traditionally in tropical areas, specifically focused in the gastrointestinal area. And we did take a product all the way from a tree growing in the rainforest to a first-in-class anti-secretory mechanism of action. The product is Crofelemer, and the brand name is Mytesi. It's approved for the specialty indication of HIV-related diarrhea, for which we sell it directly. Specialty, another word for that, is relatively small, a very important market that was fast-tracked by the FDA. That's why it's our first indication. But it will never be more than maybe $30, $40, $50 million in the United States. But what's really important about Crofelemer is it is a pipeline within a product. And we do have some transformative, what we feel will be transformative clinical events in the very near term. The program that Jaguar is focused on for Mytesi is cancer therapy-related diarrhea, which is in the midst of a final pivotal trial that is expected to complete enrollment in the first half of 2023. This would essentially extend the label of Mytesi. It is the same dose, the same formulation, literally the same bottle, and we will, with success in this trial, we would be able to therefore promote it to the 1 million patients or so who are dealing with targeted therapy and cancer therapy-related diarrhea. Where the focus on rare diseases has come from is based on this novel anti-secretory mechanism of action. We have found that the mechanism seems appropriate, quite appropriate, to benefit the catastrophic situations of intestinal failure in patients with short bowel syndrome and children with congenital diarrheal disorders, which can be based on multiple different genetic disorders, both of which are rare or ultra-rare diseases, and also a mechanistic focus on treatment of the devastation and the dehydration and the morbidity and the mortality associated with cholera. So what it is about the mechanism of action, the anti-secretory mechanism of action, the anti-secretory mechanism normalizes gut function. It's not an opioid like you might think of with loperamide or Imodium. They work by the mechanism of constipation and have a lot of the side effects associated with taking a low-dose opioid. What Crofelemer does is it normalizes the water flow into the intestines so a patient with intestinal failure can have more time to do the appropriate absorption of the nutrients of life, and specifically mitigates the dehydration associated with massive diarrhea without interfering with drug-drug interaction. The product locally acts in the gut, so we have no first pass effect. We have no secondary metabolites that are causing problems later on. So a remarkably safe profile and one that's quite appropriate for patients who are complicated with chronic illness, like short bowel syndrome patients, like cancer patients, like people living with HIV/AIDS. So the clinical events that we have in the next 6 to 12 months, we have our sponsor of a proof of concept investigator-initiated trial going on that has been started right now for short bowel syndrome and congenital diarrheal diseases in Abu Dhabi. These diseases that often have a congenital focus, an inherited factor associated with them, are more prevalent in areas where the culture is such that there's marrying within the extended family. So this is a study that's going on at the Sheikh Khalifa Medical City in Abu Dhabi, and the data is expected to be presented at the World Congress of Gastroenterology in December of this year, December 2022, which coincidentally is taking place in Dubai, with published proof of concept data. Crofelemer, not Mytesi, a different formulation, Crofelemer can be available for early patient access in Europe through an early patient access program that is available through the EMA for products designated as orphan drugs with published proof of concept data that gets the product to patients in a meaningful way and is reimbursed, brings in meaningful revenue to the company while the product is continuing to go through for full approval. So this is important clinical milestones this year in 2022 and expected early patient access revenue generation in mid-2023. Coincident in that time, mid-2023, we expect to complete the enrollment and therefore the trial for cancer therapy-related diarrhea for crofelemer in the formulation of Mytesi. So 2 different pathways for crofelemer, one in the formulation of Mytesi and one in a different formulation that would be appropriate for the rare disease market. What is short bowel syndrome, in particular intestinal failure? So a normal situation in a gut and intestine is about 25 feet. Short bowel syndrome, 5 feet or less. It could be as short as 30 centimeters. It can be due to genetic factors, an accident, surgery after cancer or some sort of inflammatory situation like Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. In any event, there's not enough real estate. There's not enough surface area of the gut for the patient to be able to absorb the nutrients of life, proteins, carbohydrates, fats, minerals, and vitamins. And so what happens to these patients is really catastrophic for their life. They often end up on parenteral nutrition for up to 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. So IV administration of the nutrients of life, 7 days a week. It never works out exactly the way it does normally in nature. So there's all sorts of side effects, complications, infections. Patients often end up in the hospital. This can be very expensive, just normal parenteral nutrition, which is basically the standard of care for intestinal failure with short bowel syndrome and CDD. Can be hundreds of thousands of dollars with complications. We can be talking close to $1 million to treat these patients. Big impacts on the morbidity, mortality of these patients. And of course, very difficult for the quality of life of these patients. What we're looking to do with crofelemer as an anti-secretory is decrease the secretions into the intestine to give the patient more time with their short bowel to be able to absorb these nutrients of life. And if we can reduce it by even 15 or 20%, that is precedent for an approval for a product for intestinal failure and reimbursement that is commensurate with the cost that it takes to take care of these patients on a chronic basis. There are about 20,000 patients in the United States, about 40,000 patients around the world. This is for short bowel syndrome. With congenital diarrheal disease, we're talking about an ultra rare situation, probably less than 200 patients around the world. The estimates for this market opportunity are close to $5 billion in 2027. And that doesn't even include the entry of crofelemer, which was not known at the time that these estimates were created. So again, a focus on how important it is to be able to reduce the costs, improve the life, improve the healthcare, improve the quality of life of these patients on a chronic basis. There's many incentives for orphan drug development, and particularly for a small company because of the small populations and the dramatic need and the unmet medical needs and the orphan designation. You have even easier access to advice and collaboration with the regulatory agencies, the FDA in the United States, the EMA in Europe. Smaller patient populations means smaller number of patients in the trials, so clinical trials that don't cost as much, a great deal of financial incentives. But again, I want to underscore what's very important for us is the early patient access programs that are only available at this point in Europe through the EMA. And we find that very important for Crofelemer because Crofelemer, in a different formulation, Mytesi, is approved for chronic use and has a great deal of chronic safety that has been completed. And of course, we have a full GMP supply chain in place for Crofelemer. So anything that we can do that is patient focused and get this product and get the relief to patients as early as possible through the regulatory pathways is the focus of our rare disease business focus. Because of that, because of the early patient access program available in Europe, we did establish a company in Europe called Napo Therapeutics under an exclusive license to Crofelemer from Jaguar Health for the European territory. And it is in close collaboration with Napo Therapeutics. Again, we did set up this company. We put in a management team that has done this before in the geography, in rare diseases, that we are now in support of this investigator-initiated trial in Abu Dhabi, which will include both short bowel syndrome and CDD patients. Again, I can't say it enough, a near-term clinical milestone that we feel can be transformative is the publication of that data targeted for December, which then supports early patient access, meaningful revenue generation, and meaningful healthcare to patients by mid-2023. The relationship with Napo Therapeutics is a license. So it has typical license terms, upfront fees, milestone payments, royalties. Ultimately, the supply of the product will be handled by Jaguar because there is an important economy of scale by keeping manufacturing under one roof. Interestingly, Jaguar is also well over the majority shareholder of Napo Therapeutics. And so that equity value of Napo Therapeutics, we don't feel is incorporated into the value recognition of Jaguar as well. And as Napo Therapeutics develops more of a presence itself, hopefully that will be recognized within Jaguar. It's also an opportunity for singularity of focus. So the Napo Therapeutics team, they are all in on short bowel syndrome, CDD, and the clinical work that they're doing in Europe. That clinical work will be available to Jaguar as we pursue those indications in the United States. Jaguar's clinical team is all in on completing the phase 3 clinical trial for Mytesi for cancer therapy-related diarrhea. When we complete that, that data is available under license to Napo Therapeutics as well. So we have parallel efforts going forward, each company with a primary identity associated with it. CDD is a collection, it's an ultra-rare disease, and it's a collection of different genetic mutations. The one that we're focused on initially is microvillus inclusion disease, which we have filed for orphan drug designation. So by the way, we do have orphan drug designation in US and Europe for short bowel syndrome. We have filed for MVID in both territories as well. This is a situation where the patient has the full intestine, but they still have intestinal failure. So they're not absorbing the nutrients of life. These children typically are born with massive diarrhea, cholera levels of diarrhea from the moment that they're born. The channels that are activated by the cholera toxin are wide open typically in these patients, which is the target mechanism of how Crofelemer normalizes water flow and ion flow. If they're not diagnosed immediately, they typically die. If they are diagnosed, again, on parenteral nutrition, typically for the rest of their life, and all the complications that come from being on IV nutrition from the moment that they are born. And I do want to say one other thing about that. For MVID, we do have 3 patients that have been identified to us in the United States. So Jaguar will be moving towards opening an IND again for this ultra rare disease in the beginning of 2023, with again the hope of having a pathway to be able to get treatment with success to these patients as early as possible. So as I was talking about these channels, we do have a mechanism, an anti-secretory mechanism that is an exact target for the clinical manifestation of the mortality and morbidity associated with dehydration from infection with cholera toxin. What cholera toxin does is opens up these channels, massive diarrhea. Typically, the patients don't die from the cholera infection. What they die from is dehydration in the first 6 to 18 hours, which is called and considered the death zone from cholera. We do have published data, presented data with Crofelemer that was done at the renowned International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research in Bangladesh, which has been run for many years in collaboration with the US government and with Johns Hopkins University. Now it stands on its own, a fabulous research center, particularly for severe diarrheal diseases and cholera. So we needed to think about what was the business model to pursue this indication. So first of all, in the United States, it is considered a rare disease. So we will be filing for orphan drug designation. Around the world, much more devastating, particularly in children. In the United States, there is something called the Tropical Disease Priority Review Voucher Program, which does include cholera. So we are pursuing this indication with the thought of focusing on that financial incentive from the FDA. A priority review voucher, which sell from anywhere from $67 million to $350 million over the past decade or so. I should say this program is being pursued with the same anti-secretory mechanism of action, but not Crofelemer, because the tropical disease voucher is only available for the first approved indication of a product. Crofelemer is already approved for chronic diarrhea in people living with HIV/AIDS and is now in development for CTD, cancer therapy-related diarrhea. So this is a second generation anti-secretory, which comes from the same plant as Crofelemer, and it is called NP300. And we just filed the IND for that last month. We were very excited about this program because we have the protocol, we have the clinical pathway from what was done with Crofelemer. Now I'm going to move to our Entheogen Therapeutics initiative. What Entheogen means is a focus on psychoactive and psychedelic plants. We have a library of 2,300 plants, 3,500 plant extracts that we have collected over 30 years. About 20% have some sort of benefit in the CNS, or have some sort of field benefit in the CNS area. So this is an asset that we were trying to figure out how to mobilize. We are very focused on clinical development in this company right now, particularly in the GI area. What could we do with this pipeline? So we noticed in the past couple of years, a number of very well-funded initiatives in the psychoactive and psychedelic area have moved forward, both in companies and in universities, but they all seem to be focusing on the same 7 compounds, opportunities, drugs: psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine. Where is the next generation psychoactive and psychedelic products to bring about new ways of treating and potentially curing these mental health disorders? So what we did is we have signed a letter of intent with a company called Filament Health. Filament Health has the laboratories for natural product chemistry that we no longer have now that we are a company focused on later stage clinical development. We bring to the table the ethnobotany, the expertise of how to do drug development under botanical guidance, which is the approval that we have for Crofelemer. Filament Health brings together the natural product chemistry capability, manufacturing capability, the IP associated with that. And then the two of us together are out seeking partnerships with those very well-funded opportunities for regulatory, clinical development, and ultimately commercialization. And we are far along in discussions. I think you can expect in the next 6 months or so to see a business development opportunity there of Jaguar and Filament together, and bringing in non-dilutive dollars, which is always wonderful, and even more important, mobilizing this asset and this opportunity for the very, very important markets initially of ADHD and social anxiety disorder, which have only grown in opportunity in this post-pandemic world. I did want to mention that we do have a small business with our second approved drug, Canalevia, which is Crofelemer, approved for chemotherapy-induced diarrhea in dogs. And interestingly, it's approved under something called MUMS, which is analogous to orphan and rare diseases for humans. So we've extended that focus even in the animal health area. And what it allowed us to do is get the product out onto the market in a reimbursed way and to those patients in need in an earlier than full approval. So sort of analogous to what's going on with the early patient access program that is available in Europe. This is going on right now in the United States. We started commercializing Canalevia, started selling it and distributing it in April of this year, 2022. Interestingly, remarkably similar dynamics to the human situation. So about 40% of dogs have to go off their cancer therapy or go to a reduced dose because of the side effect of diarrhea. That's almost exactly the situation that you see in humans. And therefore, it's not just patient comfort, which is very important and almost more important in the veterinary setting, but it also is providing an impact on the outcome of the cancer treatment in the patient, regardless of whether the patient is a human, is a dog, and therefore very important for reimbursement on the human side. The animal side, in the United States, it's a pay out of pocket situation. Even when there's insurance, the owner is paying and getting reimbursed. So there's a great match between the gross and the net here. We do have a second indication that will be approved under this analogous orphan situation. It's called MUMS in dogs, and that's for exercise-induced diarrhea. And we expect that to be approved. Again, this is Crofelemer in Canalevia formulation. It would be called CA2, conditional approval 2. Conditional approval 1 is for chemotherapy-induced diarrhea. So this is expected in the first quarter of 2023. Very exciting, very important for these dogs. And our performance right now for our specialty market of HIV-related diarrhea, we have moved to patient access programs and specialty pharmaceutical distribution, which provides much greater services to the patients. There's a lot of obstacles that insurance companies put up for a first-in-class product, a product that they feel is in the supportive care area. So we removed a lot of that with our hub services and have made a very improves distribution cost, improves the ratio between gross and net. So in the second quarter of last year, we reported 2.9 million in net sales. If we were just flat going forward, and we don't expect that, we do expect to continue to grow as you've seen in the past 3 quarters. But if we were just flat for the next year, we would be trading at like 2 times our net revenue, with no value to our pipeline and no value to our ownership in Napo Therapeutics, which is sort of unbelievable. So I know we're all under pressure right now. We have about 120 million shares outstanding. We have a very clean balance, very clean capitalization table. We have no micro cap investors with warrants. We have no resets. We have no structured financings that we would on our capitalization table or that we would expect going forward. So there is the opportunity when we have what we feel are these transformative value events for this to be recognized in the valuation of the company without any trading around any situation in the capitalization table. So these are the key milestones. Everything that's in blue is the next 6 months or less in 2022, which we're very excited about. The publication of the proof of concept data for short bowel syndrome, business development, potentially around our Entheogen Therapeutics initiative, our psychoactive and our psychedelics, the approval of our third drug approval, which would be the second in the veterinary area for exercise-induced diarrhea in dogs. And everything in yellow is within the next 12 months, or about the next 12 months, I should say. And that's completion of enrollment and completion of the primary endpoint of the pivotal trial for cancer therapy-related diarrhea, and the initiation of the early access program in the EMA in Europe through Napo Therapeutics, which will bring crofelemer potentially to patients in need with short bowel syndrome and bring meaningful revenue into the company from while the product is going through full approval, which will start in 2023 as well. We have a really important management team. There's 10 of us have been together for over 15 years. 3 of us have been together for over 30 years. We are committed to bring this product to all the different patient populations in need. And I have to say, it is remarkably rewarding and energizing as we've learned about some of these rare diseases. And because these patients have such high mortality and morbidity, there is such gratefulness for anything you can do from the extended families as well. And these family and patient groups are so important in the incentives for these rare diseases. We do have a dedicated management team in Italy that is 100% focused on the rare disease development in Europe. And wonderful key opinion leaders, including Mohammed Migdadi, who is leading the investigator-initiated proof of concept trial right now. We do expect others to start shortly in Europe. So overall, we do have a commercial stage product. Importance of that beyond the patient population that is focused on is it's a full supply chain and chronic safety that has been done with crofelemer. Mytesi is a different product than the rare disease product, but it is the same active agent, crofelemer. And that is the expansion that we are doing now with near-term clinical events, a very sharp strategic focus on rare diseases, as we've talked about. We talked about the animal health initiative. Strategic partnerships will come not only from our psychoactive and psychedelic, but we do have global unencumbered rights to crofelemer. The licenses in Europe, but we have Asia, we have co-promote situations that we're looking for in the United States as well. So you can expect to see more business development around crofelemer as well. I did want to mention one thing, that we do have 147 patents that are issued, more patents pending. However, crofelemer is natural, sustainably harvested, organic, rare, a plant-based medicine. It is an FDA-approved drug, and it is the only oral FDA-approved drug under botanical guidance, by which there is no practical pathway to create a generic. So we essentially have exclusivity forever with crofelemer. And with that, I will stop, and I think we have an opportunity maybe for some fireside chats. I'm actually looking at a poster of a fireplace right now, so this would be appropriate.
All right. Yeah, Lisa, do you want to bring the slides down there and we'll engage short? Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes here, so let's dive in. You know, obviously they're orphan drugs, but maybe talk a little bit about the competitive landscape for both short bowel syndrome and congenital diarrheal disorders there.
Sure. For short bowel syndrome, there is a product called tebutakide. It's very hard to pronounce. It's Gattex in the United States, Restaviv in Europe. And it's a GLP-2 analog. Essentially, it's a growth hormone mechanism of action. And it got approved with the rationale, the mechanism, that if you could grow the intestine just a bit, you could reduce the same thing, that primary endpoint that we're looking at, reduce the need for parenteral nutrition 15 to 20%. And that's exactly what it got approved on. It's reimbursed at the rate of a couple of $100,000 a year in Europe, close to $500,000 a year in the United States. However, it is used in less than 10% of the patients. There are several countries in Europe where it's not even reimbursed because there was no endpoints that were looking at quality of life and patient comfort. There's toxicity associated with it. There's cardiovascular toxicity, endocrinology toxicity, cannot and is not used on a chronic basis. It is not considered standard of care. So there's a lot of room for innovation and a lot of need for a different, safe, chronic mechanism of action that can be used. What we're targeting in our clinical trial is patients, even if they've had surgery, that are stable, whereas tebutakide can't be used until sometimes 12 to 18 months after surgery, until there's full adaptation of their intestine. The other products that are in development for short bowel syndrome that we have been able to see are all takeoffs on the same mechanism of action. It has to be administered IV, an injection. So there's different formulations where maybe you only have to inject every week, but they're going to have the same toxic limitations that we see with tebutakide. So we really feel that this is opening up a whole new way of treating these patients.
Got it. Do you intend to sort of pursue approval for Crofelemer for SBS and congenital diarrheal disorders in the U.S. as well as in Europe there?
Absolutely. So the European has the singularity of focus right now under the license agreement. All that data is available to us in the United States. There have been some movements in the ALS area to move towards something like early patient access in the United States. But again, that early patient access is why the initial effort is in Europe. However, for MVID, there have been 3 patients who have been identified to us in the United States. This is an ultra rare disease. So we intend to file an IND in the United States that will allow us to treat those 3 patients and more if we find them in early 2023 and work with the FDA. Again, regulatory agencies are so open to working on strategies for these rare diseases. How, with success, can we get this product to those patients as quickly as possible?
Gotcha. I think we've only got a minute, so maybe, you touched on this a little bit, but is there anything else you can tell us about the Mytesi follow-up indication for cancer therapy related diarrhea?
Very exciting and very important indications. This is a study where, at working with the FDA, they suggested a prophylaxis. In fact, they insisted on a prophylaxis design. So with these new targeted therapies, tyrosine kinase inhibitors, epidermal growth factor receptor antibodies, these patients are dealing with massive diarrhea, and they're on these agents essentially for the rest of their lives, whether they're in a metastatic situation or a curative situation. So very important, not only, as I mentioned, for the comfort of the patient, but to be able to let them start at the appropriate therapeutic dose, stay on the therapeutic dose, and stay on the particular cancer therapy. And we are talking about 1 million patients a year. So we are very excited with this program. It is all solid tumors. So it'll be a basket approval that we're looking for, and we expect to have the enrollment completed in the first half of next year.
Got it. Any sort of closing comments before we wrap things up here?
We need better financial markets to support these important initiatives of microcap biotech companies.
You're not the only one saying that right now. So look, Lisa, we certainly appreciate your time today. Again, we hope everyone enjoys the conference. Thank you, Lisa, as always. Greatly appreciate your participation here.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it too.
All right.